When you start living with the end in mind, everything starts to change. What are people going to say about you? What message is your life going to speak when you're long gone? Because you weren't born by accident. You didn't just happen to be where you're at and happen to watch this video. There is always a reason.
Here we go. Welcome to the Fuse Life Podcast, episode 152. I have with me the amazing Shae Bynes. I had the honor of podcasting her a while back and then being on her podcast and getting to know her heart. And she is the real deal. She is legit. And probably the thing I love the most about her is what her podcast is now called, her new podcast, Kingdom Over Everything. That is her life. And we were just talking before about how it's not easy to find people around the planet that truly is the case. And today we're going to open all of this up. But Shae is an author. She's a coach, consultant. She's doing amazing things around the planet. And I'm going to let her share a little bit about that right now. But I just want to say that I believe Shae is a pioneer and she has truly carved a path out for the sons of God, the children of God, to walk in a righteousness, a purity, and a way of doing business that I believe is truly God's way, you know? So Shae, thank you so much for being with me this morning.
Of course, always fun. Your morning, my afternoon. Your tomorrow morning and my current afternoon.
That's right. Yeah, and your tomorrow is looking great.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Just quickly, for those that don't know you, can you just share a little bit about what you're doing currently? And
Sure. Yeah, so on the personal side, real quick, I am wife to Phil. We have been together since we were 16 years old. We celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary this summer.
Wow.
Nice. So that's been delightful. Awesome. We have 3 daughters from 3 different generations. Our oldest is about to turn 23. Our middle's about to turn 16. And our baby is about to turn 7. We have back-to-back birthdays in this household. And so they are massively gapped apart, extraordinarily different children, but all, wonderful creations, and we enjoy them. So let's see. So that's wife part, that's mom part. I live in Florida in the United States. And so I pretty much lived all over this state. I have barely seen snow and barely experienced it. And so that is also by design.
Nice.
I lived 3 winters. In a state called Connecticut, which is the north part of the United States. And after the 3rd winter, I was like, all right, that's enough for me, right? So I'm addicted to sunshine and ocean. I love it. And I love the mountains as well. I just don't love the snow. Professionally, let's see. So the past Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur started in 2012. So we will celebrate 12 years this year, which is pretty wild. And that started, it was a total God interruption, basically, of my life. So it wasn't like my intent, my plan, my dream. It was really just a series of God orchestrated moments that led to me starting Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur with my co-founder in 2012. Without even knowing what the phrase Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur meant, we had to learn to become and learn and see God around it as we were operating in the assignment he gave us. So now 12 years later, just about, my husband became the CEO of Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur a few years ago, and I'm the executive advisor now. And I guess the main difference between what I'm focused on now versus what I did when I was CEO and founder of Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur is that for many years, I was focused on the scrappy entrepreneurial founder and doing that in partnership with God, having a greater kingdom impact through the work that they were doing and how to partner with God practically. And now on this side, I'm focused on established CEOs that have, 5 to 50 employees that want to really establish a kingdom culture in their business and to be able to operate through that business into their whole sphere of marketplace influence. And so those conversations are similar, but different. And there's just a different implementation of what it's like to have stewardship over a group of employees versus maybe being on a singular path or you and a couple contractors in your business, which is in a lot of the case, I'd say 80% of the case, probably with Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur, were people in that stage. So it's been a fun transition, but it's all connected. It's all connected.
Wow. So those of you that are listening, we did a podcast a while back, and you'll be able to find that just by typing her name and Fuse Life. And in that podcast, we go through her story. So all the stories there, which I think is an amazing story. We got lots of good feedback from it. So I think you should listen to that, because we're not going deeper into that part now as we've
Right.
transitioned, right? So
We got raw talk now.
yeah. So let's start here. Like, what are you noticing with CEOs? You know, because most people might say, "Hey, you're a CEO. You're obviously making some good money. You got employees. You're great. Like, you're winning in life. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need a coach. You don't need someone to talk to." What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely not the case. It's a variety. I have found, I did a survey in the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur community towards the end of last year to kind of find out who within the community was a CEO with employees. And I asked them a series of questions, and then also some of my clients, and just kind of getting a sense of where they are. And it really is, there's a lot of interesting themes that came out of that. One of them is, there's still kind of that same, how do I partner with God even in the midst of the challenges that I'm facing, some of these circumstances, some that are completely out of my control, whether it's economic circumstances, legislative things, or, whatever it is. Like, how do I maintain? They have a whole nother level of that feeling of responsibility, because there's salaries of many households that their work is connected to, which is a bit different than when you really feel like, I'm really kind of just taking the risk for me and my family.
Yeah.
But they'll have like 10 other people's families and all of those things. And being able to walk that out, knowing that, yes, there's a stewardship there, but you're still not their source. This position is still a resource. Getting people to grab a hold of that, so that they don't allow that a yoke of bondage, of feeling like they are the source, to be a source of anxiety for them as they're partnering with God. It's like, you're partnering with God, and God loves all the people here too. Like, it's all good. He's the source for all of you guys, right? Those are some unique things. And then there's also been multiple CEOs who really have this sense that there's things God's called them to. They're really thinking well beyond their products and services. In other words, yes, there's a product and service, and that this is how we're serving in this business, but they feel this greater pull for this culture inside of their organization, so that they're not just saying, hey, we operate in excellence to the glory of God, but how are we creating atmospheres, not in a way that is intrusive or anything like that, but how can we just be ourselves in partnership with God and be able to move the needle from that perspective? And then lastly, I would say that I've also found a lot of CEOs who have such a heart for the connectivity of their community. So it's not just, what am I doing here inside this organization, but how is what we're doing here and what we're cultivating here also going to impact not just even my customers, but also the people that are in this city, that this business is in. So I've just found a lot of people who just have a heart to see the advancement of the kingdom inside their company and outside of it. And so it's exciting, but they definitely have some unique challenges as a CEO with employees. Yeah.
Amazing. And so, I've run into this. I'm not sure if you probably have, where people say something like, I've been living by faith. And what they mean is that they either don't work or they don't run a business, and they're just trusting God to, supply in different ways.
Right.
Almost like they act like having a business is not living by faith. Have you ever had something like that? Like, I've had people kind of say that to me, like, oh, but it's different for you. Like, I've been living by faith. And I'm like, what do you think I'm living by? Like, what am I running this business by? And so when you mention a CEO and he's got people working for him, or she's got people working for her, and now they're responsible for more families, that takes even more faith. But there are so many believers who think that that's not faith.
It totally is faith. It's totally faith. I mean, when I think about my life, as the difference of my faith walk as a corporate employee versus a business owner is light years apart. Light years apart. And I've spent, what did I spend? Just about 11 years as a corporate employee, and I have now spent more than that as a full-time business owner, and it is like night and day as it relates to the faith journey in the midst of it. Totally. Yeah,
So
we're living
it
by
just,
faith, bro.
yeah, it blows my mind that some people, like, I'm like, we all called to live by faith, not
That's
just those
right.
that get donations or, So
Yes.
another thing that kind of blows my mind in your case, right? You
Yeah.
build this thing with the Lord. You start it when it's not popular, like
Right.
Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. It's not a famous thing. It's not a buzzword at that time. And you're going on this journey, and then it becomes a buzzword. It
Yes.
becomes a thing. Now you have the opportunity to build your funnel in the greatest way possible, so to speak, to lure in the masses, right?
Yes.
And then you transition, and you're
Yeah.
just like, oh, the Lord's taken me somewhere else, so I will now move on. Like, everyone would not be open to that, right? I think that's an important conversation here, because we're used to transitioning when things go bad to then find the
Right.
better, but we don't know how to go from good to better to even
Yes.
better, right? Glory to glory to glory.
Yes.
So how did that come about in you, where you're like, okay, well, my baby's grown up and now I'm gonna raise another baby in a way?
Can I add? Can I add just another element to this, just to give some context, though?
Yeah.
I shared on Facebook the other day about and you saw this, I think you commented on it, about how it took me from 2010 to, which is when I left my corporate career. I was making $96,000 a year, from 2010 to 2020, to bring home more income from my business. It was a multi six-figure revenue business, but I'm talking about personal income for myself. It took 10 years. That same year, bro, that same year, 2020, was the same year I transitioned out of that CEO role. So I was also like, not only was like, yeah, Lord's doing something, I was like, well, let me hand over that salary and here we go to the next thing. So it had
Wow.
very tangible financial implications too for me to walk away at that time. I just want people to know the real deal. It was a
Mm.
serious situation.
And so why is Shae able to make these decisions? I think this is a good point, right? Like, why are you able to make these decisions?
I am completely, unshakably convinced that God has his best in mind for me and whoever I'm called to impact. And
Mm.
I have enough history with him to just have that strengthened resolve that it doesn't take so much for me to, I don't have to sit in this space of I'm not sure, I'm not sure, I'm not sure, I'm not sure for a long period of time, need 20 confirmations in order to move on the thing that he's speaking to my heart about. It's because of history with him that's made that very possible, because I can't say that would have, there were some rather radical faith moves I made many years ago in the beginning of the journey, but that was based off of radical encounters with God
Mm.
that shook me up so much that it was just like I just had to know that God was in it, and so I did it. But in terms of making that a lifestyle of being able to make those types of moves, it's because of history with him. I mean, he's more than shown me his his faithfulness. I don't need any more evidence of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you remain unattached while you're totally attached, while you're
Right.
building something that requires you, yet your heart's unattached to hold it freely. And I love that, and I love that you're talking about the history. And maybe we could go into this. Like, for
Yeah.
me, I look at, say, maturity and in a few phases, and we've talked about that a little bit in terms of the church
Yes.
context, and 1 John chapter 2 talking about dear children, young people, fathers and mothers. And it's almost like when you're a little child, you need that prescription, you need that
Right.
instruction. But as you grow up, you learn principles and you learn how to apply principles. But I feel like at some point we grow up even more into positional inheritance, into embodying who our Father is and
Yes.
becoming more than just the doing of applications of principles. We've become the
Yes.
nature that caused that principle, And
Yes.
and so I see that as a big part of what you're doing. And so when you talk about us maturing into that, growing into that history, having a history, maybe you can speak to some of the people who are starting off now or just starting off and they don't have much history. What
Right.
would you say to them?
I'll tell you that a couple of things that really helped me very early on in the journey was uh, keeping track of my own history in even the smallest of ways. And so I wanted to be inspired by other people's testimonies, and I was. So I would engage in, hearing others' testimonies, right?
Mm,
But I was keeping record of my own. And I wouldn't be looking for the big things. It would be in the small things. And because I was taking note of the small things, I was maintaining a record of how it's like those small things became big things. Because when
mm,
I realized how intimately he was involved in my life, so that something that I consider to be a small thing, he was engaged in, it helped to like grow me and my intimacy and my trust with God. So people
mm.
would say, it's the small things. I'm like, actually, the small things really are big things, because then you realize how very much involved he cares to be in our lives.
That's so good. And so when you keep record, you're meaning like in a journal? You have a
Yeah, so
journal or?
I had my little journal and I would keep record. And the other thing I would do, especially when it came to, so that was like my own like little history with God. Then when it came to operating in the assignment, that it was kind of like, I don't even know what I'm doing here exactly, but I'm just going to walk this thing out with God. I would keep record of every testimony someone would send me. So every time someone would email me and say, oh, thank you so much for this XYZ thing that you did, and it made this difference, or someone who comment or something on social media, I would screenshot, I would save the emails. I kept a folder in my email that I called the awesomeness folder. And whenever I was feeling some kind of way about the journey that I was on, I would go back, look in that folder, and it would take no less, it would take 5-10 minutes of hanging out there for me to recalibrate and realize I'm where God wants me to be. I'm fruitful even when I don't feel like I'm fruitful, and I'm going to continue to walk this thing out with God. Those were two things that I did in the beginning. And I realized after doing, especially that awesomeness folder, I didn't have to do that for very long, because God in his faithfulness would show, like, people would show up enough that it was like, after a while, I'm like, I don't have to go look in that folder. I know that I know that I know, right? But it started with just writing stuff down until it became just such truth and revelation for my heart.
That is so good. And I do things like that too with my journal. Like I'm big on telling people they need two books. They need a journal for their heart and a diary for their mind, and then
I
life
love
becomes
it.
much easier, right? So I love that. And when you look at the Old Testament, you see them putting little pillars and little monuments, just marking a moment that they could pass on to their kids of, hey,
Yes.
let's not forget who God has been to us. And if you're listening to this and you're starting a business, or you're just starting your journey with the Lord, or even if you're halfway through, I've met a lot of people who've forgotten a lot of their track record. They've
Yeah.
forgotten the stories. And it's important, I think, to bring to remembrance,
Yes.
the last thing I just want to say on this is if we look at how we operate, our conscious mind and our subconscious and unconscious mind, if 90% of our functioning is happening from there, as you pay attention to your track record, it's like you reprogram yourself, and suddenly
Yes.
your new way of operating is in way more faith, is in
Yes.
expectancy, is excitement. And so, man,
It's
I
happening when
love
you
that.
don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah. And this will become your new way of life. It's
Yes.
almost harder to not have faith. It's almost harder to become or think negative now. But
Yes.
one more thing I just touch on, and maybe we can go into this,
Yeah.
is I love that you're like, hey, on a day where I feel some type of way, I'm going to come to this thing. So you are acknowledging that there are going to be days where you feel some type of way. Like there are a lot of
Yes.
believers that think that when I'm in my God assignment, I'm always going to be vibing. It's going to be great. Troubles are going to come, but I'm going to just smash them. I'm going to feel great. And so I love you have a strategy for that. And I
Yes.
try and train people that I'm coaching also to have strategies for your bad days, your not so good days, your bumpy days.
Yes.
Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yes. Now, I will tell you, someone asked me just the other day whether I ever felt over the last 12 years, if I ever felt like quitting, and I had said, what? I said I never wanted to quit. However, there was many days. I've even had some within the last couple of months where it's like, you know what, Lord? I mean, we could just press pause for 2 seconds, or we could do this another way. And are you sure, Lord? Because, I definitely continue to have some of those days. And knowing how to respond, I also have trained myself, like you just talked about, how to respond to myself when I'm having those days. And I also don't shame myself for having them, because I might be like God, but I'm not God, and I'm not perfect, and I'm going to have feelings.
So good. And then I think this is going to liberate so many people who get condemned when they have
Yeah.
a bad day or feel bad. I really had to learn to love myself through the process. And a lot of that was actually not when I'm stuffing up, but
Right.
it looked like me loving myself when I'm not matching a standard I put on myself.
Yes.
And I remember a big lesson I'd learned. It was around meditation. I had made a plan that I was going to meditate 20 minutes a day in the morning to spend my time with the Lord like that. I was already doing this 5-minute to 7-minute thing every day. And the day I made the decision that I'd go to 20 minutes, the next day I didn't meditate, and I just couldn't meditate. It was like something went wrong. And I'd walk past my chair. I have this one chair, and I know I should be sitting there, but I'm not. And it was like a 2-month process of not doing what I planned to do. And the whole time it was like the Lord was training me to love myself into this place. And about 2.5 months in, I found myself going into this 20-minute meditations, and then it became the norm.
Yes.
But I didn't, like the old Joseph would have beaten himself into that. Like, get your butt here and put the timer on it,
Yeah,
But
you
when
don't
I
know, why didn't
loved,
you do this yesterday? Gosh, you're not serious about this walk.
how are you going to coach people when you can't even make yourself sit on that, And
Yes.
but when I loved myself into it, I became it. Like I was no
Yes.
longer acting it or proving, I became it. And so can
Yes.
we touch on that a little bit? Because I see that in you, like you are the woman. I talk a lot about God wants to make you the person your dream requires. Before the
Yes.
dream is seen, you
Yes.
become it.
Yes.
And a lot of people, especially these days, we can shortcut or find a shortcut, and we're all trying to act like something with social media and portrayal and using
Yes.
buzzwords. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this with what you had in mind when you asked this, but I'm currently, you and I might have had an after chat after we did our podcast, and I was on the beginning of talking to you about this. I'm currently, and this started maybe September or so of last year, I started to recognize that where I was and where I felt life required, I call this grace over grind living. So I was considering myself operating at grace over grind level 8.0 living. And I felt like life and business and all the things required grace over grind level 10.0 living. Okay. So I was with the Lord, like, Lord, I feel like you're always the gap filler. So that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about me and how I'm showing up. I feel like I'm operating at grace over grind level 8.0, but that what you have on your heart for me right now is grace over grind level 10.0. So help me, give me your mind concerning how I fill that gap, the my part gap, right? He didn't give me an answer right away. All right. So I had to sit with that for probably a few weeks. And after a few weeks, he gave me this word around, like he gave me strategy for how I could fill the gap. Now, here's how it looked. I go into December, goal setting, sitting with God around the year and all of these things. And he gives me this word and he says, I want you to live, the key is going to be to live ascended. And I'm like, okay. Like, I understand what you mean. Seated with you in heavenly places, live ascended. Okay. So help me fill the gap of how I'm living now and what you mean when you say live ascended. And he gave me these 3 words that were confirmed from a friend that I had breakfast with the next day. And those 3 words were around proclamation or decree, intercession, and declaration. Now, what's interesting about that is those are 3 actions. Okay. 2 out of 3 that I normally do relatively regularly, and 1 that I don't, just maybe as led by the Spirit here and there. Okay. But he was giving me specifically, these are 3 things. These are like your tools for the gap that you're sensing that does exist for where I want you. Now, here's the thing. Some people might be like, okay, cool. So now you've got this list of things to do, right? But here's the thing. Just like when I first learned many years ago on how to work in partnership with God, and it took me showing up with the diligence of submitting my to-do list, having a set aside time, sacrificing, this time to sit with God around these things. And it was like a discipline, but over time it just became me. And it was in him I live, in him I move, in him I work, and all the things. Same thing that I'm now in a different way. So he's saying now for Live Ascended, the way you show up, the thing that you're discerning right now, it feels like a thing to do, but it's not going to be a thing to do for very long. It will become you. And then it will just be the outflow of you, and you will just be it. Right. So that thing that you were talking about, I'm still experiencing that. So you're like, act like the one, you are the one. I am, but I'm called to be another one in this season. And so I'm walking through that again right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah. So you did answer the question. I love it. And I guess that's where this weird concept, like there was a German word someone introduced me to when it comes to eschatology around it already is, but is becoming.
Yes.
It already is, but it's becoming, like who was and is to come, always was, is, and always will be. It's that amazing mystery. So I get what you're saying. And
and I think that's a good thing, right? I mean, it's just like that's the kingdom, right? It's progressive. We should be going from one level to the next, right? I'm like, if I'm not growing, I'm dying. So like, what are we doing? It's all good. Yeah.
Except this growth is, as we are rooted and grounded in him, the growth is the byproduct and the fruit is the byproduct. And we're not striving to grow the tree.
That's right.
It's just happening because of where we are planted.
Yes.
And that's powerful,
Yeah.
So what would you say is the purpose of money? Let's start there. Money, right? Because
yes,
that's the biggest part. I think that, I'm trying not to go on a rant here, but
no, go for it. It's raw talk. Rant on.
Jesus talked so much about resources, wealth, and money, and Christians, we've been so confused around that issue or conflicted around how do we feel about it. What would you say is the purpose of money?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a resource to be stewarded for God's purposes, which can include, and other things include it takes money to actually live. You've got basic expenses and essentials for your home, right? You've got the things that God's put on your heart, the good works that he's called you to, whether it be in giving and stewarding other things. Money is a resource that's needed for that as well. So to me, I'm like, it's just a resource that helps in doing the things God's called me to do and being who God's called me to be. And I just keep it open. And because I believe in being a distribution center in the kingdom of God, I'm not looking to hoard it. I'm not looking to do anything like that. I'm looking to stay open-handed. I'm able to receive it and I'm able to give it. I'm not married to it. I'm not tethered to it. It's just a resource. And so that resource can bring pleasure to my family by taking my family on a trip so we can spend some time together. That it can be in giving, it could be in whatever, right? So that's how I see it.
Yeah. And I guess that's the same for me. I talk a lot about the ecosystem, just being part of the ecosystem of heaven.
Yeah.
And obviously we've had Jim Baker talk about the pipe, and you get to drink from the pipe. And I've talked a lot about if I'm able to receive something and give it away at the same speed, then I know I'm in a good place, giving and receiving part of a bigger system. But did you ever have to face your limiting beliefs? Like, what were some beliefs for you? So for example, for me, in my early stages when I got saved, money was like this, just God brings it and that's it. Like, that was a real limiting belief. I had no understanding of co-creating with him or co-laboring with him. And it was like God's just deciding and he's in charge, and he puts people through these poverty tests to see if they will, I'd have these ministers would come and share, and they'd be like, oh, we were down to our last can of spaghetti in the pantry, and and then God will test you. And so I had this weird view of God and money, and it actually put a lot of fear in me. And I would say many times to the Lord, like, oh, you probably don't need to test me and my finances, like, because it was not about his heart anymore or him
Right.
maturing me. It just became about, this weird concept of money. Did you have any limiting beliefs like that you walked through?
Yeah. So my starting point, I didn't think about God in any way about money. I just thought it was my job to go out there and get it. And so my starting point, my limiting belief starting point with money, is that it all started and ended with me. So that would have been my limiting belief. It's the grind. It's the, if it's going to be, it's up to me. I'm going to, so I would have always have been limited. I would have been limited by doing things in my own strength without any insight whatsoever in God's role in that, in him as provision himself, and all the various flavors of which that gets, expressed in our lives. And so to me, that was my massive limiting belief. Then I would say shortly, like when I'm thinking about kind of in my adult years, when I kind of chose my own church and was just kind of going to church and all the things, I remember I was probably it was early 20s, the first church my husband and I went to after we got married. And I remember being in service, and there was some guest pastor that was there that day, and he had asked us to, he wasn't just like doing the $1,000 line, $2,000 line. It wasn't like one of those situations, but he did ask us to ask God about what we were to give. And I remember this. I remember, and my husband and I would have this thing where we would pray, and then we would look at each other and give the number, and then we would go with whoever's number was higher, right? And so this particular time we did that, and we both had the same number. And I don't remember what the number was, but it was probably like 1,000 or 2,000 or something like that. And for us, that was massive. You might as well have been asking, it might as well have been $1 million at that time, right? Newly married, like, didn't have a ton of money in our savings account at that time. It might as well have been $1 million. And I remember in that moment, we were just like, and this was before I even had intimacy with God, but there was something around that moment of that agreement within my husband and I that we're just like, we're just going to trust God and we're going to go for it. Right. So I had that type of thing happen multiple times. And then I would see God do something supernaturally in some other area of finances. I still did not have intimacy with God. Let's be clear. I still had no revelation of with God, none of that. But I saw a principle at work even in those times. And so by the time, so I feel like that was already an upgrade from my thought that I got to do all of this thing on my own.
Sure.
But it was still limited in that perspective too. It's not until I was then growing in with God and then having other adventures. And you were talking about that test. You talked about the poverty test. It wasn't a poverty test, Joseph, but because I came from this perspective that my job was my source, all these other things were my source, and I didn't have revelation, even though I was experiencing these other things, I did not have a revelation that God is the source. And so when he called me out of my corporate job, and I'm like, okay, I don't know how this is all going to play out. It's like we went through a phase where we went down so low that I had no choice but to learn and get a revelation that he was provider, like he is provision himself. And I'm grateful for that. It didn't take long, but I'm grateful for that because I knew that that's a revelation I needed to have for the rest of my life. But not only that, the thing I didn't realize at that time, but only realized years later, was that it was also something that I went through for the benefit of others. Because if I can't relate, if I always had more than enough, doing things in my own strength and doing the things, high paying job, great grades, scholarships, and all the things, great paying job and all those things, and I'm supposed to be serving people who don't have any of those things and are experiencing, these deficiencies or lacks in some areas, I wouldn't even be believable. I would never have known what it's like to trust God to be provision. So to me, it was a gift to experience that. I didn't look at it as a test of poverty. I looked at it as an opportunity to have a revelation of the character and the nature of my King. And that allowed me to learn for myself, as well as me to model and be able to understand and walk through with others.
So good. Boom. And I'm in complete agreement. And so that shifted for me, right? Like years later, me and my wife, we did go through a year and a half of what the heck's going on,
Uh-huh.
and what did we do wrong,
Right.
and what are we not doing right, and all the reaching that Joseph in his orphanness wanted to do. I'll take any
Yeah.
job, I'll take any way of making any money, Lord, and today I view that very differently, just like you. Like, I guess
Yeah.
I see it as God detaching us from the system of mammon that all of us
Yes.
are raised in,
Yeah.
and I would liken the marketplace typically in the world is the worship center for mammon, and we're raised in that, and it's like he's detaching us from one system to learn how to live from the
Yes.
kingdom. And that's a
Yes.
big deal. So I love
A
what you're
huge
saying.
deal.
And then you learn his nature, his character, his goodness, his ways, and he raises you in governance and stewardship. And
Yes.
yeah, I think
All
that's
of
big.
that. All of that.
And there was a time where I tithed because it was a good principle to use.
Same.
And now I give and steward because that's who I was created to be, like my
Yes.
father.
Yes.
So yeah, very,
Yes.
very cool. And
Yeah.
when you were talking about in a church and, you and your husband giving money,
Yeah.
there was a time for me where the Lord was like, empty your wallet, and I never carry cash. But somehow, sometimes, some clients when I was a fitness trainer would just give me cash. And so
Uh-huh.
it's like the Lord knew, for a while I was like, should I take my wallet in here? Like, because there would always
You
be,
need to
hey,
swipe your
empty,
card.
empty your wallet, empty your wallet. So this one day I'm like, Lord, I have nothing. And I keep feeling empty your wallet. I pull out my wallet, and in the back corner is this 50 Singaporean dollar note. And my dad and mom had given me this wallet as a gift, and they put a $50 Singaporean dollar note in there for some reason,
Uh-huh.
and so I never spent it because I can't. So I emptied it, and I remember when I put that into this offering bucket, it was like I heard a whip crack, like
Mm.
on the back of everything that poverty or mammon was trying to do in my life. It was a weird experience, and I had
Wow.
that 2 or 3 times. And then what started to happen was when I'd meet people for coffee or lunch or something like that, the Lord would be like, you're going to pay, because the kingdom pays for everything, Joseph. And it was the
Mm.
real irritating thing because he was saying it to me over and over. And it was a week where I had too many meetings, and I was like, kingdom's paying, but it's going out of my pocket. Like,
Right.
and it was like he was raising me in a new understanding, and
Yes.
so I relate to what you're saying.
And I relate to that part because I don't know how many years ago this was. This was now when I was on the with God life. But there was another layer to it, Joseph, because I remember I was doing a study. I was talking about like radical generosity, right? And I considered myself a generous person, but not a radically generous person. Like the only way radical generosity would show up in my life is if Holy Spirit said, in that case, like, hey, do the 2000. I never would have thought to do, like, I never would have done that, right? Normally. But if I'm led by the Spirit to do something, like, I'll do that. But so I'm only radically generous by request, right?
Mm,
By
mm,
instruction, but I'm generally generous. Okay. And so one of the tenets of in the heart of Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur as a movement is or reflects as radical generosity. And
nice.
so he started giving me these little assignments like you just talked about that were totally stretching me. So it started with just like these instructions, like it started with like when people who are homeless that'd be on the side of the road, normally if they would ask, they'd have their cup and they'd ask for money or whatever. I would just be like, sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't, just depended on the day, da da da. And they would always have to ask. I would never be like, hey, come over here, never. Okay. And then there's a season he said, every time you're out, if anyone asks, you give. If anyone asks, you give. I'm like, okay, that's different. Now this was an instruction. And then he took me to, now they don't have to ask. Now they don't have to ask, just give. And then and he wouldn't tell me what to give or whatever. It would just be like, every time they don't even have to ask, just give. And boy, was that stretching. But that was him
Mm,
teaching me, how to flex the muscle of radical generosity. I am still not there. I'm still on I haven't become radically generous. I am,
Mm,
but I am way better than where I was. I'm way better. But
so
I
good.
still have more to go for that to become me naturally, supernaturally.
Yeah. That is so good. And I love that you
Levels to
are
this thing.
okay. Yeah. And that you are okay with going through the
Yeah.
journey. And, if you're listening to this, I hope you can see that authenticity is very high on Shay's and my core value list. And we
Totally.
don't need to pretend or portray
Yeah.
anything that we are not to make someone think something. And I guess we're both hoping that you will embrace that path too and just enjoy the journey. One of the
Yes.
things I've been teaching with our clients, I say all the time, is I am where I am and I'm growing every day.
I like that.
Total peace with that,
Yes. I
So,
like
and I
that.
love that you differentiate the generosity and then the radical generosity, because I can see that in my life too, that it happens on instruction, but
Yes.
it's not a natural thing yet.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm obviously still growing in that understanding. And
Yes.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, totally.
So we're talking about giving. I think we should talk about receiving, because a
Cool.
lot of people have that problem too.
Facts.
And when you said radical generosity, the first thing that popped in my mind, a couple of years ago, I was invited by some people to go and minister in their location, which was, in the South Island of New Zealand. So we have 2 islands. And by the way, by what you said at the beginning of this podcast, that you like mountains and beaches and sun and
Yes.
summertime, New Zealand, North Island,
Oh my gosh.
you would,
I have to add it to my list of places to visit then.
yep, you have
Yes.
to, and you got to come see us. And our
Yes, of
whole crew
course.
would love to hang with you. It would be amazing.
Totally.
Yeah. So I got invited there, and they were like, "Look, we want to, fly you over, and we'll look after you." Da, da, da. I'm like, "Okay, that's great. I can receive that." But then they're like, "Hey, bring your family over, and we'll pay for your family to fly, and we'll look after a car and car seats and accommodation for your family." And it was really weird, because I found that really hard to receive. Like, if
Yes.
they'd said to me, "Hey, we're going to give you monetarily the same amount," I would have been fine with receiving that. But it came in a way where it's like, "Oh yeah, your family and these people I love are going to get taken care of." And
Yes.
it's like it hit me, in a different way. And I struggled to receive that a little bit, because the value of that just went through the roof.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started to see, I do have these blockages in receiving from God, because somewhere I'm still siphoning that, or putting that through a sieve of, am I worth it? Do I deserve it? And it's become
Yes.
about me and my performance somewhere, instead of his goodness. So can
Yeah.
you talk about receiving? Because I know a lot of people struggle with receiving too.
Yeah. That was really good. By the way, because I love the way you differentiated between the difference of someone just giving you a check for the amount of money that you could have done all of those things with, and them giving it to you in such a way that it was some cash, but hey, the thing that you found more valuable than the money, we're going to take care of that too. So that is such a good differentiator
Mm,
to do that. So I love that. The this whole idea of having a tough time receiving, I got to tell you, from mentoring entrepreneurs for so many years, it is wild to me how many, and how this even plays into the business context, how many really struggle on the receiving side, and how that then shows up on the business for even products and services that they are delivering
mm,
to somebody. So it's not even like the ability to receive something that's being given to you in pure generosity, radical or otherwise,
mm.
but even the ability to receive the value that you're putting out in service to somebody else. So
Wow.
it's really been interesting how the difficulty in receiving can play out in so many different aspects, of where you serve and how you show up and all of those things. I will tell you, I probably struggled more on the generally receiving has not been a struggle for me. Like that has not been one of my issues. But However, in terms of general receiving,
Mm.
in a business context, I definitely had to grow in being able to value a service in a way that I could receive based off of that value. But I'm delighted, and maybe just because I mean I like gifts, I love service and stuff like that. That's like a love language for me, and so I'm able to receive it because I just see that as an expression of love, and I love it, and I'm grateful. So maybe
Mm.
maybe that because that's kind of my makeup that's not difficult for me. But that element of how that played out in a business context, there was definitely some areas of stretching that I had to exercise there.
Mm. And then receiving, so let's say not just monetarily, but receiving favor,
Yes.
receiving compliments. Like I had
Yeah.
an issue receiving compliments. Part of New Zealand culture, there is this lacing of false humility, you know.
Okay.
And when I came here, I started to adopt that through schooling, and you just kind of sit in the back and you're capable of stuff, but you never show it because otherwise people are going to either chop you down or make
Right.
you feel like you're trying to be something.
Yes.
And so you lace it with this false humility, and so suddenly receiving compliments was something the Lord had to train me to be okay with. Like, hey,
Yeah.
they're saying something to you, look them in the eye and take
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Receive it. Why can't you
Yes.
receive it, Joseph?
Yes.
Have you had anything like that, receiving not monetarily, but then maybe favor? Because I know some people are really scared to get favoritism in a way, because then they are worried about how they're going to be perceived by other people or things like that.
I think so. Mine on the favor side, it's not connected to how it would be perceived, but I have had to get over the block of wondering how can I repay them for this.
Mm, mm,
So I had to get the revelation of the fact that part of being a distribution center in the kingdom of God is that you don't always receive and give in the same. It's not a tit for tat thing. It's just you give from the kingdom, you receive from the kingdom. Like I had to get a revelation of that because it was a hang up for me because I would want to. And it's not because, and it wasn't just like a pride thing. It wasn't like pride, like I can't receive it, but my mindset would be like, I will receive this, but how can I do this to the same measure
sure.
back to that person, right? So that they know that I appreciate, what they've just done for me. I want them to have that appreciation. And in my limited mindset, I would think I could only express that by I guess an equal exchange or equal valued, or the perception of an equal valued exchange or something like that. I definitely had to get over that part for sure.
That's so good. I think that's a distinction that would make sense to a lot of people. I'm thinking of some people I'm working with right now that's something for them.
Yeah. It's not tit for tat in the kingdom. It's not you scratch my back, I scratch yours. It's not like that's the way the world does stuff. And stuff gets done that way. I'm not saying things don't get done that way, but that's not the heart of the kingdom for sure.
Man, so in India, like you can get a lot of things done when you know people, right? And it's very obvious. And obviously sometimes there's a lot of bribery that goes on, things like that. And it's interesting that Proverbs talks about bribe being a gift and all this kind of stuff. And maybe one day we get to talk about that. But I remember when we flew back for the first time after moving to New Zealand, so 4 or 5 years later, I fly back and we're at the Indian airport, and my grandfather had all these connections, so we're in this line, probably 200 deep, and we're right at the back with all our luggage, and my granddad's standing there just calling us, just it's like, hey, come to the side and come. And I'm like, no, we're not all going to walk past 200 other people in a line. And then he sends a guy, and this guy comes to take us up, and it was the weirdest walk of my life, like embarrassing and amazing at the same time. Receiving favor sometimes can be like that, where the rules that apply for everybody suddenly don't apply for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay. What would you say to that?
Yeah. I mean, there could be definitely some awkwardness in that process, but I do believe that the more we steward the favor that we receive, the more we grow in that favor, which also means there's more favor to give away, right? It's just like it's not, we're positioned for that, for the ability to give it away. And so I think a mindset shift on favor isn't all about me, but favor is the ability for me to give it away, right? I think that mindset shift helps. And also the idea that if I can exercise, just like other things, like if I can exercise the ability to receive this measure of favor, if I could steward that favor, I mean, the scripture even says that you can grow in favor. And so it's like, so the more you do that, and even in the smaller things, it helps you to grow capacity for being able to receive and give more away. And so, I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be new experiences that will stretch me. I'm sure there will be on that. In that, I haven't hit one that was uncomfortable for a while, but I believe that the season is upon me, that I just may be experiencing some things that will feel a little bit uncomfortable, that I've got to kind of stretch myself into.
Yeah. Well, as you say that, I do think there is something in Africa, favor for you in Africa.
My husband said the same
Politicians,
thing.
delegates, open
Yeah.
doors. So that is,
That is exactly what my husband said.
100%.
He's been saying that to me for years. Yeah.
Amazing. So,
Yeah.
You're big on grace over grind, and I love that. So maybe we can touch on this quickly, because grind is something that's glorified. It's something that's almost, you're a hero if you're able to grind. And I think a lot of believers also adopt that principle and try and put kingdom icing on that cake.
Yes.
So did you have personal experience with grinding, or that went bad, or was on its way to bad? Or was it just something you noticed and the Lord started revealing to you and you steered away?
Yeah, good question. So remember how I had shared how I was kind of like, if it's going to be, it's up to me. And I'm just like, so I was totally a grinder. I was team no sleep, work my high paying corporate job and work a business on the side, make things happen. And that was me. So I was totally in grind, hustle and grind culture, unapologetically, that was me. Okay. And not to the point of destruction, thankfully. There's definitely points where people get to that point where they're completely exhausted, or whatever. I probably had my youthfulness of being in my 20s on my side, so I had energy for it. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities at that time, so it was kind of easy to just kind of continue on that path. What shifted for me was because when I came out, I had that series of divine interruptions of my life. So when the Lord speaks to me about leaving my job, and I'm like, oh, wait, you care about my job? It was like, huh? Like, you care about this? Like, oh, I had another plan, but oh, you have something in mind that wasn't what I had in mind? That was like a duh, kind of moment. And then when I left my corporate job and I was still kind of like just learning that God cares about what I do in my work life, and just trying to learn and navigate that as in growing my real estate investing business. It was just that next layer of when he called me to do Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur without me having any revelation of partnership with God at work at that time. It was just like, yes, Lord. Okay. Because he showed up in the way he did. So I'm like, okay, I'll take this adventure with you. So when we started Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur, I still it was more like a for God mentality. Like, so it was almost like I'll hustle and grind for the kingdom. I was probably like that for about 3 or 4 months. I wouldn't say those things, but that was just my posture. Okay. I want to be obedient, but I'm doing this for God and for the kingdom. A handful of months into that, maybe 5 months or so, is when I had this encounter with God over Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30 in the Message Bible, where Jesus is saying, are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you will learn to live freely and lightly. And so it was in that moment, Joseph, it was like, just a revelatory moment that I had that struck me in my heart. That's like, the missing link is the with factor. It's like, I need to work with him. I need to keep company with him. I need to walk with him. And it was just like, okay, this is the key. Now, Lord, show me that. So I never got to a point of critical destruction or just about to be destroyed, my marriage, the situation with my kids, my health, or anything like that. I never, thank God, reached anything close to a breakdown from that perspective before I was invited into something that was extraordinarily better than how I'd been living. And it was necessary because I'm supposed to be doing this thing called Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. How am I going to be doing this out here grinding for God?
Man, so good. I think that's going to speak to so many people.
God, I didn't even call you to do that. That's the gift that
Yeah. And by the way, I love that message translation. I've heard that a few times, and I love that you've got it memorized. And that's beautiful.
It's like it's here. Like it's here. I mean, I had heard my yoke is easy and my burden is light a million times. It wasn't until I heard it expressed, which is why I'm such a fan of reading multiple translations and doing the studies and all the things, is because sometimes God will use just another way of expressing language to really get to you. And so I had heard that scripture many times. Okay, his yoke is easy, his burden is light, but that did not translate to me as walk with me, work with me, keep company with me. Like it didn't hit me that way, you know. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for Eugene Peterson, brother Eugene, or maybe it's Patterson, I might be mixing up authors with the writer of the message, but I'm thankful for him.
Yeah. And I agree. I love it. The translations definitely add dimensions to what we're looking at.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's so much here, and I love it. I love your heart. I love this conversation. I love your journey. This is beautiful. I'm trying to think of where we can go here, right? Because there's multiple things, but maybe.
You said you wanted to talk about alignment. I mean, in essence, we've been talking about it in some ways, but you might have had something specific on your heart when you said, I want to talk about alignment.
Yeah. Well, we've kind of touched on the ease factor, that we're not grinding, right? In alignment, that's one of the things. And maybe we could go into that. But man, I just had this thought and now it's.
Bring it back, Holy Spirit.
Because there are so many things that I see you doing really well. And I think that these are foundations of kingdom business, but they're not taught. And here's something I was thinking, right? Like you don't have a typical funnel way of marketing. You don't have a typical, maybe the 80% way of marketing that's happening in the world right now. So where do you get your strategies from? How do you sit in that place to then have the confidence also, or the trust to do something that's not necessarily status quo?
Yeah.
And keep going all these years. Like you have a track record, like you say, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe we can touch on that, because I've watched so many people in the last 4 years, and me, myself, I've had to fight to not get sucked into the trap of, or what's the latest trending thing to do? What are all the gurus saying, even the ones that are going to use kingdom as a buzzword, saying to do, and people just trying to copy that. And then, at least for me, by fighting that, I've watched myself come into this level of, you know, maybe success, if you call it that, but my business has grown. It's at a place where it's going even further. But there's so many I've seen who just come back to the starting point and then go again and come back to the starting point because they're just
you're following a trend. Not following God. Yeah. It's like, so I have a fundamental belief that heaven has a blueprint for your business. So, and I also believe that many people who teach these strategies are great resources, but God is the source. Strategies, people, gurus, coaches, whatever, they're all resources. So I start with the source because I fundamentally believe that heaven has a blueprint for me. So I want to seek God's heart concerning the things I'm doing, his wisdom and strategies concerning what I'm doing. And I'm trusting that the one who birthed this assignment in me knows, you know, how we're supposed to operate, right? And so because I fundamentally believe that, I'm able to trust and walking that out. So that means that, I mean, we've done typical things like, so for example, a Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur has a quiz funnel, a quiz thing that's on the front end or whatever. You know why we did that? Because Holy Spirit gave me that as a strategy for a particular season that we were in, as a way, because it was almost like, I want you to put this in front of them so that people can read these questions and begin to assess, and then you could show them how they can grow from there. This is a wonderful tool to help people to do that. So it fell right into where we were supposed to be focused anyway. I could have been like, oh, forget quiz funnels. Everybody's doing quiz funnels. But I was like, no, the source highlighted a particular strategy to support a particular tooling of what methodology to support what he wanted us to get through to people, right? So that's my framework. I want to seek God first and then move from there. Now, on the other side, now with the stuff that I do as an advisor and strategist, I'm launching a private podcast. Like, people would be like, why would you do private? You do a public podcast so you can build platform for all these CEOs and this, that, and the other. Like, why would you do it private? Well, because I'm looking to have a intimate conversation with individuals, not a broadcasted conversation to build platform in that area. What was God's heart concerning what I'm supposed to be doing with CEOs? It wasn't the same as, starting the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur podcast. It wasn't the same as doing the Kingdom Over Everything podcast. It was something very distinct and different. So I don't fall into the trappings of really, this is the best way, because that's how you reach the most people. And that's how you build credibility with people who want to see you, not just helping the scrappy entrepreneurial founder, but that they see you, and you built this platform of how you help the CEOs. And we want everybody to see that and know that. So you got to put that out. No, I don't. So that's kind of my process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And maybe I could have asked the question better, because obviously funnels have a place in marketing, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I could have asked the question better, but you answered it really well, I think. And the resource source differentiator, yes, I think, is a big deal. And
it's
maybe
a huge deal.
Yeah. So maybe what I was really trying to say is that a lot of people push the resource as if it's the source.
Correct.
And so many people are stuck in the cycle because that's still just the resource, and the resources keep changing.
Correct.
And the resources
and then you don't have faith with that resource. And so when that resource doesn't produce in the time that you want, in the manner you want, because it's not even connected to any conviction whatsoever that you're standing in faith with God on, then when it doesn't produce what you want in the timing that you want, it's the next squirrel that goes by that you're like, oh, I saw the ad for this strategy. And when I see the testimonies for that, this person built 7 figures in 3 months off of this. So you know what? This was the wrong one. Now I'm going to go and do this instead. You're not rooted in anything of any substance, which is why it's easy to just keep going with the wind, when things aren't moving the way you would hope that they do, or the way they were quote unquote promised that you would, or that they baited you with a particular vision that doesn't give you all of the insight behind how that reality even happened, but then you're baited by the financial result and not rooted in God's heart or mind concerning your own business.
So then, how do you define success?
I define success. This is literally the only formula in Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur world. Faith plus obedience equals success. And so to me, the world's definition of success is completely based off of outcomes. And for me, the faith and the obedience already equal success, but the external, so I'm already walking in success, but the fruit, the manifestation, the external things that people are excited about and we get excited about, that comes in that process of growth and alignment that comes along with it. That's the outcome, but that's not the success. That's my perspective on success.
Awesome. And that's the byproduct.
And also that faith, by the way, does have a corresponding action. So it's not just saying I have faith. I don't mean just saying I have faith, I have faith, I have faith, but faith, which is demonstrated by your corresponding action plus your obedience. So when God calls you to do something that might not be the way, you would have done it, thought to do it or whatever, that you're willing to say, yes, Lord, and submit and surrender what was your plans for what you're receiving from him. The combination of those two things already equals success.
It's so good. I love that. And yeah, I agree with that totally. And so if you're listening to this and you're in a phase where you're not able to see outcomes that you deem successful, the world deems successful, but you're obeying God and you have faith that the purpose that he is wanting through what you're doing is happening, then you're in a good place. You know, I wish I had this conversation with someone when I ran my fitness business, which went for 8 years. And I was still thinking that success was going to be the outcome and how much money I made and how many clients I had. And I took coaching based on that. I spent a lot of money with coaches who were all driving from external outcomes.
Yes.
And it's like I went through that whole journey to learn that, no.
Same.
And,
I mean, that's how I was in any business pursuit that I had prior to Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. So it's funny that the very business that he called me to was the thing that actually changed me, you know?
Wow. That's amazing. And when I finished, I was able to see actually the purpose of my fitness business was to make me the guy I am now who can do what I'm doing now, you know? And so faith, obedience equals success. I love that. I think that's massive.
I think if you attach this also with what you said about like your the journals, I think you said a journal for your, what'd you say? A journal
for the heart and a diary for the mind.
Yes. That this is where that comes in handy too. This is part of the tracking. So in other words, having a focus on celebrating even the small progressions that you take in business or whatever, even tracking those help you to establish momentum so that you're not always looking at what isn't, but you're able to celebrate and have gratitude for what is as you're building. And so to me, that connects with that idea of journaling too. I mean, that's why when I would be looking at, gosh, in those early years, if I was measuring Kingdom Driven LLC's success based off of revenue in years 1, 2, 3, and 4, it would have been an utter failure and I would have stopped. I would have been an utter failure. But I had so much evidence, documented evidence, that it was a success that I hadn't seen the financial manifestation of that, you know, show up yet. But it was obvious. I had evidence that it was still success in God's eyes. And so therefore, because it was success in God's eyes, it was success in my eyes.
So this revenue thing, like, because most people will see posts that are like 6-figure revenue in a month and 7-figure revenue in a year.
6-figure revenues and 0 profit.
I think you got to touch on this a little bit. You got to touch on this a little bit because I think most people, most people would not believe that could be the case, that someone just said they made $1 million this year, but their take home was 50K, 40K. Like,
if you just watch an episode of Shark Tank, you'd get a reality check. So I don't know if you guys have Shark Tank in New Zealand.
Yeah, we get reruns here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because you would see how many business owners will come in with their pitch for the sharks, and they'll give these massive numbers, and they're like, okay, well, what's your profit margin? They'll be like, well, we lost $500,000 last year, and I'm not paying myself. Or it's like, this is the reality of business. There is revenue, there is profit. There's some people based off of their business structure that look at all of their revenue because it's like they're the only person in the business and they don't have any expenses. A lot of times their revenue comes close to equaling the profit that they can take for themselves because they are super low overhead. But if you have a business with expenses, if you got a team, if you've got all these other things to support, you've got other bills other than paying salary to yourself that you have to then make sure is covered before you have said profit to then have any either distributions from. And a lot of people reinvest profits because they need to invest in things for that next level of growth. Those are expenses and reinvestments. They did not hit your personal bank account. And so it is smoke and mirrors. And so I'm always encouraging like the new entrepreneur, this is why you don't get suckered by marketing hype, because it's not a full story. It's not a full story. And so don't be drawn by that and thinking that, and then I think that's why that, and I think that comparison then creates so much disappointment because you're like, well, all these people, listen, I've had conversations with folks who make way more revenue than I do, but yet still have like the same, but have low profitability. And they're not upset about it. It's based off of where they are and what they're doing and their intentionality. And some were like, no, I really need to fix some stuff like this is not it. But from the outside, people would think, oh, you're rocking it. You're rocking it. And then be jealous. And it's like, no, you actually really wouldn't be if you were in this position. So it's smoke and mirrors. It's not always smoke and mirrors. Some
Sure.
people are very much telling the truth of what it is, but there's a lot of hype.
To build
And that's
that
why I told that
perceived,
my full story, just
yeah,
to help somebody who might be feeling like, man, I'm 5 years in and I haven't X, Y, and Z, and all these people, whatever, whatever. That's why I tell my story.
which I think is more the case, right? Your story is more the typical case for all of us, that
Yeah,
we
it's
actually
very
grow,
common.
mature, and
Yeah,
yeah, I,
it's very
I
common.
think it's a normal,
Yeah. It's not
yeah.
always 10 years. Like if I took it, I had to put in like the comment, a little comment section. So there's a difference between being led by the fastest, most profitable way and being led by Holy Spirit. If I was led, when I left my corporate job, if I was led by the most profitable, the fastest way to profitability, I would have just focused in on a consultancy, provide high value services. I would have had very little expenses. I would have taken my profits, invested in more real estate. We were doing real estate investing. I would invest in more real estate. Like that would have been my path. And I would have had
Mm.
God-given gifts, talents, and abilities that I just would have done, leverage, low. I mean, could have done that. That would have
Mm,
taken way less than 10 years, unless the Lord was like put,
sure.
unless he was blocking me,
Yeah.
that would have taken way less than 10 years. But
Mm,
I chose to align myself with what God had on his heart concerning. I mean, there's nothing better than that to me. And so I
mm,
have zero regrets about the process and how long it took for that to show up in my personal bank account in a year more than what I had left at my corporate career. Like I don't have any regrets over that whatsoever.
so good. Faith, obedience equals success.
Yes.
And I know some of you listening just started businesses. You're getting good stuff here. And in reality, like Shae's saying, if it's 10 years for us, it's lesser for you in a way because we're having this conversation.
Right.
So you get to collapse time. And that's why I
Yes.
think having mentors and coaches is great because you get to collapse time,
That's
save
right.
pain,
Yes.
and accelerate through the journey. Do you want to say
That's
anything on that?
right.
Having coaches and mentors?
Yes. Yes. Having coaches and mentors is super helpful, and having ones that are aligned with your mind and heart. Allow God to be the source who leads you to your resources of coaches and mentors. Don't just choose them based off of whatever is being externally said or whatever. And it could be good and it could be wonderful mentors, but not a wonderful mentor for you. Wonderful coach, just not a wonderful coach for you. And so that alignment piece, allowing God, who's the source, to be the one to align you with the proper resource is super important. I believe, I don't know what you think about this or what you've experienced, but I believe that a lot of people try to get coaches and mentors and consultants that are past their current season. Like they're out here looking for this result out here, but they're not even positioned. They're not even positioned for it yet. So they want like mentor for 3 phases down the road. They want coach. There's people who can't listen. Just real talk. There's people who want me to be their mentor and they could not handle me. Legit. I would hurt their feelings, and not intentionally,
Mhm.
but because just where we are and what I have patience for, how God used me right now to pull people into things, I would hurt your feelings. You
Mhm.
need someone way more pastoral, and someone who was me 8 years ago. I could have been your mentor, but I can't be your mentor now, right? But people want it. There's people who want the mentor who's made 8 figures in their business, and they haven't even made 5 figures yet. But I want that. But you know what? This person over here will be way more helpful for you in your journey now, for the stage that you're at now, that you can actually implement now. So I mean this spiritually and practically in terms of operationally. I think a lot of people are like, they're grabbing for the wrong folks because they're not focused on the source and allowing the source to be the one to lead them to their resources that are wonderful accelerators and multipliers through coaches and mentors and consultants and all the like.
I think that's a great point. And I've seen that even for me, I had to recalibrate that a few years back. And just even like if you look today at the marketing gurus, the ones who have the numbers, the ones who are probably sharing very good content, but
Yeah.
it makes no sense to someone who's at a level 1 business or level 2
Right.
business.
Yes.
There's nothing that you can grow in. So I think it's a great point that you're making, and letting God pick your resource. I think
Yes.
that's a big deal. Like I stopped suggesting books to people just because the book was great for me. I had
Right.
to learn like this is not going to be necessarily great for you. Like we could sit in the same room and this is where I'm meant to be. And if it's not where you're meant to be, it's an hour wasted for you.
Right.
That learning how to let God govern that. In him we live, we move, we have our being,
Yeah.
just makes it so much better. And I've found now that I'm receiving gold from people that are in a way unknown, relatively unknown, but they have successful $3 million, $4 million businesses.
Correct.
They're not popular online. Everybody doesn't know about them. But for where I'm at, they are adding so much value to my operations.
Yes.
And I think that's massive. That's hitting a big
Yes.
point there.
Yeah. Some of the people that I have in conversations with behind that, none of them are like platformed. Nothing wrong with platform. Obviously, I have platform, so I'm not coming against that. You do your assignment, but none of them are.
Yeah. And that was a big thing for me. So now as we come into this alignment conversation, aligning to your assignment, right?
Yeah.
You know, being on social media, when the Lord first told me to come on and post stuff a few years back, I had a real battle. It was probably 7, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was starting to see views. And at that time, Facebook videos were going way further. Every video had bigger views and comments and likes. And,
The good old days.
yeah, it might be 10 years ago now, actually. And I remember starting to get my value and my identity, like getting affirmed from these things. And I'd say to the Lord, like, it's probably not a good thing. Like, I'm starting to enjoy this. Let me get off it.
Yeah.
And I'd feel him say to me, no, you got to stay on it. I've called you to this place. So I'm like, well, what do I do with this thing? He's like, well, learn to get it from me while you're doing the stuff.
While you're doing it.
It was really, it was hard. Yeah. And but I knew that he's called me to social media. And at that time, people around me probably devalued the online space a lot. You know, pre-COVID, a lot of believers devalued the online space. They didn't think it was important. They didn't think it was connected to discipleship. And post-COVID, obviously, a lot of people now reaching out like, oh, Joseph, you know, ahead of the curve or whatever. But this space, so the alignment to the assignment, maybe we can go into that right now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, and not everyone knows at any given time kind of like what the assignment is. And one of the things I want to do to give freedom to folks is that even if you're like, I've been seeking God around assignment, and I'm not sensing anything different from where I am now, but yet where I am now is not really where I want to be. By the way, nothing gets wasted in the kingdom of God. So if you don't have an answer for a thing, then steward where you are at. He will not waste where you are at. And so I think that sometimes there is people put pressure on themselves for alignment that's different from where they are. So, and a lot of times there is alignment that's different from where you are. So be courageous to make those pivots. But I wanted to say, because I think someone needed to hear, that there's also times where the alignment, like you might be sensing something, and it could be in times to come, that you're where you need to be right now, but you need to steward that as you continue to seek God around the things that are to come, right? Like that's okay too. You're not out of alignment just because you're not exactly in the place that you think that you should be, but it's yet where he wants you and where he's going to use it. And so juice that, like, God, like, what is it that you want to do with me? Partner with God with where you're at right now and allow him to continue to illuminate and open paths and to walk those things out. So I wanted to make that first caveat on this conversation of alignment. What do you say?
Yeah, just a point on that. Like, so I did this Heaven in the Workplace workshop, and I've been talking about it a bit with our clients. And some of the guys, just from doing what you just said, from going, okay, Lord, why do you have me here? What are you doing through me in this business, even though I don't see it or I don't think I'm valuable to this company? You brought me here, so what are you doing? Just from that, I had someone message me about a 20K pay rise.
Wow.
Which is crazy, right? Just from that,
that's
2 days after.
Yeah,
it's like 2 days or so after starting to ask that question. Okay, Lord, you got me here for a reason. What is it? Boom. As they start to see that pay rise, another guy got offered a promotion, double his income.
Wow.
So I think that alignment, just that one piece, is massive.
It really is. It really is. And there's questions that I like to ask when it comes to alignment. Like if is there something I need to start? Is there something that I need to stop? Is there something that I need to some place that I need to stay? Like I seem to be in a hurry to move on, but you want me to stay. Like there's just these questions that we can ask God that help us to kind of it's kind of like alignment check, doing an alignment check like we do with our cars or whatever, but just kind of doing that alignment check and seeing, because sometimes there's a gap between what we're thinking and what God's thinking in terms of where you're at right now. And it's funny because when I do like alignment check stuff, whether it's with clients, mentees, or whatever, it's hilarious how often there's a new revelation that comes out of them spending time with God in those questions. Oftentimes on the thing to stop and also on the thing to stay. Like those two things, like start, people are usually, that's right in alignment. They'd already been kind of thinking about these things, but that stop, we're like, oh snap, I'm not supposed to be doing this anymore. It's usually like an ouch, I didn't know that. And now I got to seek God on how to transition or pivot or whatever. And then that stay is usually like, oh, I was trying not to continue to do this because I don't think that this is fruitful enough, or this is just agitating. And now this is where God wants me. So I need to align myself with his perspective concerning how I steward my right now. Those two, I've watched the answers from the Lord on those two. Be quite a process for people.
Yeah. And I see that too. And even in my own life, I was a door-to-door salesman in 2010, 2008, 9. And that's kind of how I met the Lord through that process. And I remember wanting to leave that job. I'm like, okay, everyone who loves you goes to Bethel and joins BSSM. I'm ready. Let's go. I'm like, I'm out. And I remember having this disdain for that job suddenly, like you're robbing me from my life. But when I'd speak to the Lord, he's like, you're staying here. I want you to stay. I want you to stay. And it was another year and a half. But during that year
how long did it take in that year and a half for you to not feel some kind of way about the fact that you were still there, and to kind of adjust to, okay, how do I just flourish here?
Yeah. And so that's exactly what I was going to say is actually, I don't know. Somewhere along that way, I lost track of trying to progress something and just started to enjoy the journey.
Nice.
And, my door knocking, door-to-door sales career, if you want to call it, actually trained me in so many things of the Lord. Like I would ask him doors that I should go into and not go into. And I learned the hard way. I had to jump out of one fence because of a dog. I felt the Lord tell me, don't go in there, but I went in there, and then a big dog comes around the corner, and and then that's how sales began. Like I would know, I was practicing like, what house is a person that wants to buy this thing? And
I love this.
It was great. And I sell people cable TV and cast demons out of some people in their front yard. And it was like I was learning how to move in the kingdom. It was like my little Bible college,
Yeah.
And I got rejected a lot. When you're a door-to-door salesman, you get rejected a lot. Sometimes people want to expressively reject you, and my anger and things I want to say back. And there's a lot of good training in that part of.
I have a lot of respect for people who do door-to-door sales because it's the same thing with like Jehovah's Witnesses. Like I don't agree with you, but I respect that you show up like to all these doors.
Yeah, man, this conversation has been so awesome. We've been going nearly an hour and a half.
How did it go by so fast?
Yeah, I think you're amazing. I love what you carry, and I love we get to vibe, and there's so much more I think we can talk about as time goes. I'd love to wrap it up with this conversation that we started on, which is, while things are going on, some are great and some suck at the same time. I got great things going on and confusing, contradicting, sucky things going on at the same time. What's up? What's going on? Can we touch on that a little bit?
2024. Yes. Well, so what do you want to talk about that?
So there are probably people here that would say, man, my business is killing it, but my relationship life, like I was with a guy yesterday, and he really, his heart's desire is to get married,
Yes.
And I think our next conversation, we should touch on that. I think that'd be great, on marriage and being single and stuff like that. And so there are areas of his life where it's like, and then there's this either family dynamic, or I'm not yet married and I'm getting a bit older. How do I process this? And, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's so funny. I just finished recording something about this, which was how to maintain a kingdom lens when life is happening, and there's like the good things and the not so great things or whatever. And some of the things that I share that are just like practical things in my life. One is that I frequently ask the Father, what is your perspective on this? One of the gifts of a with God life is that we can have the mind of Christ and align our perspectives with His. So I ask, what is your perspective? Because I want to match my lens with His lens. I want to make sure if I find myself in a cycle of focusing on the problem, then I know I'm out of alignment, because it's like, if I, the kingdom way would be to be solution focused and solution oriented. Okay, so cool. So I need to repent, change my thinking, change my perceptions, and I need to align with heaven concerning this thing and be solution oriented. Do I have to figure this thing out by myself? No, I happen to have the ability to partner with the one who knows all the things. So I go and I seek heaven for solution to the problems. I also know that with God life is Emmanuel, God with me always. And so I know that He is with me. I'm an atmosphere creator and shifter. And so one of the things that I know helps to shift the atmosphere of my mind, my heart, like all the things, is gratitude. And so I may not be thankful for the thing, but I'm certainly going to be thankful in the thing. And so I'll like shift the atmosphere of my own self. Sometimes it's me escaping to the car, going outside with my feet in the pool, going and sitting in my favorite chair in the corner of my office to like get myself together and to focus on and reflect, and even out of my mouth, express gratitude. And I find that when I do that, it completely shifts the environment. And so maybe my circumstance hasn't changed, but it has at least postured me to be able to be solution oriented, to receive solution, to receive different perspectives, so that then I could walk it out. And so those are just some of the practical things that I'm currently doing and that I've been doing for years to just help me walk this thing out and keep a kingdom lens in the midst of challenges and all that stuff that are inevitably going to happen, by the way. It's life.
That's so good. I didn't want to interrupt.
I was able to do that fresh, because I mean, I just recorded this one, bro.
Yeah. And it's probably great for people to hear that you can have great things going on, and then some things that are sucky, and you're not able to change that in the moment, but you are able to change your perspective. I love what Trent Sheldon says. I remember this quote: your perspective can either be your prison or your palace,
Ooh,
and learning
like that
lens.
Yeah.
And so many times, even when we go into prayer or soaking time with the Lord, the situation doesn't necessarily change, but our view of it, our perspective, our perception, and our approach completely changes. And that's usually enough to.
I was like, that's 90% of it right there, right? Yeah. And it's so interesting. I have watched, just because of relationship that I have, with CEOs and just kind of walking beside them, I have been encouraged. But I have watched some CEOs walk through some very, very challenging stuff, and to face things that I have never faced myself, and to watch them to do it still with like the same thing that works for me now that I'm helping them to walk through, to see it's the same for them in a situation that's way more challenging than I have ever experienced. I'm watching the same thing that helps me at the level of challenges that I face help them to stand, where I'm just like, I'm encouraged. I tell one of my clients, like, you encourage me regularly, because I know that if ever I had to deal with X, Y, and Z, I could still the same things, because it's the same God, the same kingdom that applies here too. And to watch you do that in His rest, and to watch you to do that solution oriented, and to watch you deal with some of the most agitating of circumstances, and to watch you be faithful to still do the things He's called you to do and trust Him to take care of the things that you cannot, that's encouraging to me, So and so I've watched folks walk through some stuff while there was also amazing things going on in their lives or businesses. Yeah.
Boom. Well, there you have it, guys. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. Shae, do you want to tell people where they can find you or anything like that?
Sure. You can find me. First of all, I'm pretty active on social media, on Facebook and LinkedIn, Instagram, but you can go find me at shaebynes.com.
and I'll put that link in the caption, so easy to find. And I also have this simple Kingdom Finance training. That's a free training that's also available if you want it. The link is in the caption. This is probably the best feedback I've ever received on any of my trainings was on this, and it's called Sparrows and Lilies, and it's on the simplicity of Matthew 6, walking with God and just receiving. So you may enjoy that. But Shae, this was great, man. Like I look forward to more conversations on all kinds of topics.
Yes.
And again, I just want to say,
Kingdom over all the things.
yeah. I just want to say again,
Thanks.
like, I honor your path, honor your journey, and your husband, his
Yes.
path and his journey. And
Yes.
I'm looking forward to everything that's going to come from your life.
Same. Appreciate you so much. This was fun.
Yeah. Awesome. So you stay with me, everyone else. That's us. Goodbye. We'll see you on the next one.